I bet this book wasn't on your bingo card, but what I'm going to do in between the series from time to time, I'm going to bring in other books that I think are interesting, that have, fact versus fiction in them, and put them into the other categories, the fantasy meets history, the British royal family, and I also envision one that'll be US history. But I want to bring in these books that I enjoy, but that there's a story behind it, but they aren't worth a whole book series arc. The tragedy on Everest is something that's always just fascinated me. I think it's because I am so deathly afraid of heights. I will never go to Mount Everest. I will never climb it. Although I did climb Mount Olympus, but that's another story for another day. I truly have no idea why, but all of a sudden, YouTube started sharing with me a lot of Everest content. And one of the videos that I happened to watch kind of put a whole new spin on the disaster that happened in 1996. And so I kind of got fascinated by it all over again. Now, this video is going to be 2 parts. This part just kind of outlining the whole thing. And the second one will be more the debunking and the fact versus fiction part. But if you stick with me through the end, I'm pretty sure you're going to hear a whole different side to this story than you've ever heard before, because I know that I did. When people think about the book Into Thin Air, they assume they already know the guidelines, the basic outlines of the story. There was a storm on Mount Everest, climbers died, and Jon Krakauer wrote a famous book about it. But that shorthand skips over almost everything that actually matters. To understand why the 1996 Everest disaster became so culturally important and why it is still debated nearly 30 years later, we need to slow down and reconstruct the story carefully before interpretation, before blame, and before Krakauer's voice becomes the dominant lens through which we see it. Mount Everest, by the mid-1990s, had entered a new phase of its history. What had once been the domain of national expeditions and elite alpinists was now increasingly accessible through commercial guiding companies. For a substantial fee, climbers could join expeditions that handled logistics, fixed ropes, stocked camps with oxygen, and provided professional guides whose job was to get clients to the summit and back alive. This was not inherently reckless. Many guided climbs succeeded without incident. But it did change the social and economic dynamics of the mountain. Summit success was no longer just a personal gain. It was a product being sold, and reputations and livelihoods depended on delivering it. In the spring of 1996, Everest was crowded. Dozens of climbers from multiple expeditions converged on the mountain, waiting for a narrow window of stable weather in May. 2 of the most prominent guiding companies that season were Adventure Consultants, led by New Zealander Rob Hall, and Mountain Madness, led by American climber Scott Fisher. Both men were experienced, respected, and had successfully guided clients on Everest before. Their teams included a mix of highly capable climbers and less experienced ones, united by the same objective: to reach the highest point on Earth.
In the spring of 1996, 2 of the world's greatest climbers, Scott Fisher and Rob Hall, led this expedition to the top of the world. Both men had summited Everest before, but this time they went as competitors, leading non-professional climbers who paid as much as $65,000 each to be guided to the top. There was a businesswoman from Japan, Yasuko Namba, a mailman from Seattle, Doug Hansen, 2 ski instructors from Aspen, Tim Madsen and Charlotte Fox, a dentist from Colorado, Dale Cruz, a wealthy New York socialite, Sandy Hill Pittman, and a pathologist from Texas, Beck Weathers.
The route most climbers used was the Southeast Ridge, beginning in Nepal and passing through a series of camps established progressively higher on the mountain. By early May, climbers had acclimatized as much as possible and moved up to Camp 4 on the South Col at roughly 26,000 feet.
I told myself I was here to write a magazine article, but already Everest was exerting its pull on me. Already the fever was building.
I'm Rob Hall. I want to make sure you know who your guides are. There's Andy Harris. Hi. Mike Groom.
Hi there.
You're Mike.
And our lead climbing Sherpa, Ang Dorji.
Tashidele.
Okay. I'd like to begin by introducing my fellow guides. To my right, Neil Beidelman.
Hi, everybody. If you need anything at all, please feel free to ask him.
And him is the one and only Anatoly Bukharev. And my lead climbing Sherpa, Lapsang.
Hi.
Tomorrow, we begin a 10-day hike into Base Camp Everest. Now, Base Camp is 17,600 feet. Then Camp 1, 19,500 feet. It's early in the game, but already there's a third less oxygen than at sea level. So we'll lay in again and let our bodies adjust.
Then we go up to Camp 2. Now, Camp 2 is 21,600 feet, which is when you have to start worrying about edema, both cerebral and pulmonary. It's where your brain can swell up like an overinflated balloon. Your lungs fill up with so much liquid you literally drown.
Camp 3 is 24,000 feet. Now your body is inhaling 4 times faster than normal and still not getting enough oxygen. Your digestive tract is going to want to call it quits, leaving your body so hungry for nutrients it'll literally start to eat itself.
And then it's Camp 4, 26,000 feet. Welcome to the death zone.
From Camp 4, summit attempts typically begin late at night, with the goal of reaching the summit in the morning and descending before afternoon weather and exhaustion becomes dangerous. This timing is not a suggestion. It is one of the few hard rules on Everest. Above 8,000 meters, the body is in what climbers call the death zone, where oxygen levels are so low that physical and cognitive decline are unavoidable. On May 10, 1996, climbers from multiple expeditions began their summit pushes. Early on, things did not go according to plan. Fixed ropes were not put in place where they were expected. Climbers bottlenecked at narrow sections of the route, and progress slowed dramatically. These delays compounded, pushing summit times later into the day. Some climbers turned around as planned, others continued upward, despite the ticking clock. By early afternoon, climbers were still summiting. This alone was dangerous. As the day wore on, weather conditions deteriorated more rapidly than anticipated. Clouds moved in, winds intensified, and visibility dropped. A powerful storm enveloped the upper mountain, transforming the descent into a fight for survival. Darkness fell, temperatures plunged, and climbers became scattered across the ridge and upper slopes. Many were exhausted, disoriented, or running out of supplemental oxygen. Communication during the storm was sporadic and unreliable. Radios failed or were misunderstood. Climbers searching for Camp 4 wandered into whiteout conditions, sometimes passing within a few hundred feet of safety without realizing it. Some collapsed where they stood, unable to move further. Rescue attempts were made, but rescuers were limited by the same altitude, weather, and exhaustion as those they tried to help. By the time the storm subsided, 8 climbers were dead. Among them were Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, the leaders of the 2 major expeditions. Others survived but suffered severe frostbite, resulting in amputations and lifelong injuries. One of the most striking survival stories, honestly, that I have ever heard, was that of Beck Weathers. Beck Weathers had literally been left for dead, out to go die in the snow, twice. And somehow he regained consciousness, stumbled back to camp with catastrophic injuries. His survival became emblematic of both the randomness of high-altitude physiology and the impossibility of clean moral judgments in such conditions.
God, it's a miracle.
Get up.
Easy. Watch his hands.
Another thing that is consistent throughout all the narratives is the idea that there were a lot of inexperienced climbers on Everest that year in 1996 as a part of these expeditions.
Bit of a letdown, isn't it? Over 200 climbers got permits this season. There's only 2 weeks when we can climb her, so we'd have to go pretty much the same time.
I was thrilled to finally be at the foot of the great mountain. But my excitement blinded me to obvious signs. Signs that would have warned me of the tragedy to come. There were teams from many different nations on Everest, some less experienced than others. The Taiwanese, for example.
又不告诉我，拉丝塞，哎，天气很好啊，那天，哎，这，
I'll help.
哎，
It's upside down. See? This.
哦，不告诉我，
Upside down. This one too. See? Man, you don't belong on this mountain.
That there were inexperienced climbers on Everest is not disputed. The effect that those inexperienced climbers eventually had on the expeditions is disputed. But we will get into that in part 2. That is the basic, undisputed outline of the 1996 Everest disaster. Climbers were delayed, weather deteriorated, people were caught high on the mountain, and multiple deaths resulted. What remains contested is not whether the disaster occurred, but how it should be understood. Was it the inevitable result of extreme risk? Was it caused by commercialization and overcrowding? Did individual decisions matter more than systemic pressures? And perhaps most importantly, who gets to answer those questions? Jon Krakauer entered this story as both witness and participant. He was on the mountain as a journalist assigned to write about Everest's commercialization. And he was also paying client to Rob Hall's expedition. He summited, descended into the storm, survived, and later wrote Into Thin Air, a book that would shape understanding of the disaster more than any other account. For many readers, Krakauer's version of events became the definitive story. Krakauer was writing under conditions that complicate certainty: trauma, survivor's guilt, and the cognitive effects of extreme altitude. Other climbers who were there remembered events differently. Some challenged his timelines, his characterizations, and his assignment of responsibility. Over time, Into Thin Air became not just a best-selling book, but the center of an ongoing debate about memory, narrative authority, and how disaster stories are constructed. That debate is where part 2 begins. Because once we understand what happened in broad terms, we can ask harder questions about how the story has been told, who has been criticized or vindicated, and what it means when a single narrative becomes dominant. The 1996 Everest disaster is not just a story about a mountain. It's a story about how we explain catastrophe and why those explanations matter. Thank you very much for listening. I will have part 2 up in a couple days. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.